great and inspiring work that America is all in is doing to broaden the tent for climate leadership at all levels of government and all across society. There are more and more places across the country that are being affected already by the impacts of climate change. And one state that is intimately familiar with these hazards is Louisiana. The state has set out its forward-looking approach to building resilience to climate change and pursuing prosperity in a low-carbon economy. To share more about the state's approach to climate change, we're pleased to have Governor John Bel Edwards. Governor Edwards was sworn in as the 56th governor of Louisiana in January 2016 and started his second term last year. Governor Edwards' remarks will set us up for a great discussion of resilience leaders who are addressing climate impacts in very different parts of the country. Wade Crowfoot, the Secretary for Natural Resources in California, and Charles Sutcliffe, the Chief Resilience Officer for Louisiana. Wade and Charles will be joined by Susie Toriente as moderator. But before we get to that discussion, I'm pleased to turn it over to Governor Edwards.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this conference. As you all know, aside from Louisiana's amazing people, awesome food, and unique culture, our state is probably ground zero for climate impacts. That's why we are positioning ourselves as a global leader in coastal climate adaptation. Throughout this conference, please keep focused on the very real experiences of communities suffering because of extreme weather events that are becoming more extreme and more frequent due to global climate change. On August 29th, Louisiana was hit by Hurricane Ida, a very strong Category 4 storm that was among the strongest in our state's history. With temperatures in the 90s and humidities near 100%, more than 1 million homes and businesses were without power, and thousands had to live in shelters. There were 30 storm-related deaths, of which most were due to the heat and to carbon monoxide poisoning from generators that were improperly used as people tried to stay cool. Within the last year alone, Louisiana has been hit by 4 major storms: Hurricanes Delta, Laura, Zeta, and then Ida this year. Since taking office in 2016, I have visited more victims of natural disasters than I ever thought possible, and I've gone to the federal government 23 times for emergency disaster declarations. That's excluding the COVID-19 pandemic, which has also taken a tremendous toll on our citizens. But Louisiana is doing far more than seeking federal assistance. We have also built one of the most ambitious and accomplished pre-disaster coastal adaptation programs in the country. Guided by a science-based process that balances the needs of short-term and long-term sustainability, Louisiana is building more protection and restoration projects than anyone. Since taking office, we've invested more than $15 billion in construction projects benefiting nearly 32,000 acres of wetlands and 359 miles of levees. We hope to break ground soon on the nearly $2 billion Mid-Barataria Sediment Diversion Project that will restore the environment, sequester carbon, combat sea level rise, provide natural storm surge protection, and support nearly 2,000 construction jobs. But Louisiana also knows that we cannot build our way out of this climate crisis. We must also reduce greenhouse gas emissions contributing to global warming. To balance the interests of climate policy and the economy, I've called together a diverse group of stakeholders to build our policies in a way that is rooted in science and in transparency. Among the pillars of our plan are solar and wind, industrial electrification, green hydrogen, blue carbon, climate equity, and forming partnerships across government, academia, and the private sector. Our imperatives share one common denominator: our commitment to our people and to our future. So as you are all gearing up for COP26, I encourage you to think seriously about how you can put these commitments into action for the benefit of real people like those right here in Louisiana. If done right, adapting to climate change and addressing the root causes of climate change can be vehicles to transform our communities and our economies. Hopefully, I can join you next time in person. Until then, thank you for your work, and God bless.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Governor, for that interesting words that you shared with us this afternoon. I'd like to stay in Louisiana for a little bit and start our conversation with Charles, the state CRO. Hi, Charles.
Hey, Susie. Thanks for having me, and thanks for inviting me to be a part of this conference today.
Absolutely, thank you. You know, Charles, I was thinking that when I was in your shoes as a CRO in Miami Beach for 4 years, now in my work I do city resilience across the globe at Jacobs. I used to say that the process for building resilience was really the same, right? But it was really the uniqueness that comes from the local flavor, right? It comes from location, culture, history, and all those things. And I was wondering if you could share, kind of from your perspective, what are those shocks and stresses that that your state needs to deal with, and what are the top priorities that you and the governor are working on?
Sure. Thanks, Susie. So, the governor touched on a lot of it in his introduction video. I mean, obviously, we've got hurricanes in Louisiana, and people are still really hurting and in recovery mode right now. So, as difficult it is to battle Mother Nature, we do have a good plan in place for how to at least wrap our heads around and wrap our arms around what's driving the problem and what the potential solutions are. So the governor referred to our coastal master plan, which is really driving success there. So I think that's pretty good. At least understanding what we need to do. Getting it all done and funding it all is another issue entirely. But I think the second big issue that we have is just more statewide flooding, whether it's from rainfall events or riverine events. We have just a lot of water in Louisiana. It doesn't all come from hurricanes. And so we're really accelerating our efforts there. We were hit by torrential floods in 2016. And from there, we've kind of built out a whole new system of gauges and monitors. And we're building models from that to kind of, again, prioritize projects and try to address that comprehensively. But I think kind of the next most pressing issue that we have to figure out is going to be heat. And the governor referred to that, kind of in aftermath of a hurricane, when you don't have electricity to turn the air conditioner on. But we know we're going to see more hot days all over across our state in the future. And that's something that we don't really have a comprehensive plan for yet. And we don't have large scale projects to try to implement that can, reduce that vulnerability for tons of people at a time. And so I think that's a big issue that we need to kind of work on in the future.
Thanks.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, thank you, Charles. Very similar to the issues that we face here in Florida. Definitely no surprise. But let's jump over to Wade for a few minutes. And nice to see you, Wade. And thanks for joining us. Let's maybe compare and contrast a little bit about, what does California see? What are your climate threats and your shocks and stresses that you're prioritizing?
Yeah, thanks. Well, first of all, great to be here. And Charles, thanks for your leadership. And Susie, in the Southeast. We, of course, have a much different climate out west, where we have, thanks to climate change, less water than we would normally have, and hotter, drier conditions. The way I think about it is, we've always had these extreme events, whether they're big storms on the eastern seaboard or hurricanes in the Gulf or wildfire and droughts in California. Climate change supercharges those events. So in California right now, as you know, we face worsening wildfire seasons. Warming winter temperatures and warmer spring and summer temperatures mean that more of our forests and our wildlands are drier to begin with a lot of tree mortality, dead trees. And then in the spring and the summer, we have small fires becoming much larger, hotter fires as a result of those warming temperatures. This year in California, we had 2 catastrophic fires that did something that had never been done before in California, which is they were burning so large and so hot, they crested our Sierra Nevada mountain range, which had never happened before, and went to the eastern side. We know the wildfire crisis is worsening as a result of climate change. We're also dealing, like Louisiana, with extreme temperatures. In California, we lived through our hottest June on record, followed by our hottest July on record, followed by our hottest August on record. And that means temperatures above 120 degrees in parts of the state. So think about being a vulnerable senior in an apartment without air conditioning, living through that extended heat wave. We are experiencing heat domes across the entire Southwest that are stressing our grid and creating reliability challenges. And then, of course, the worsening drought. Drought and flooding are part of our natural ecological cycles in California. But again, those warming temperatures means less snow in the winter and more rain that flows out of our system. And then that snowpack that we've relied on for 100 years to form the basis of our water supply is increasingly absorbing into very dry soils or evaporating as a result of record spring and summer temperatures. So we're in the second year of our drought, and we're already experiencing conditions that are akin to something like a fourth or fifth year of a drought just 20 years ago. So those are some of the challenges we face.
Thank you, Wade. And we definitely see that on the news all the time. And, we feel it, even if we can't be there and see it. So I understand what you're saying. I'd like to maybe now shift gears. We've outlined the issues. What are the policies, projects, and technologies you're putting in place to address these? And I always like to start with policy, because I think that's how you institutionalize change, not just one project at a time or maybe a tool or technology. So could you maybe outline some of that you're doing? Wade, I'll start with you, and then we'll go back to Louisiana.
Sure. I mean, climate change requires a paradigm shift in the way that we manage our communities and natural resources. And by that, it means really stepping back and understanding this is not a matter of simply responding to an acute one-time challenge. We have to change our system. So in this case, our water systems for providing enough water for our communities and economy and taking care of our fish and wildlife, and our forests and our landscapes against the impacts of wildfire. So in both cases, we have big, broad, very specific strategies or action plans, as we call them, that identify the actions that actually we need to take to make ourselves more drought resilient and more wildfire resilient. This includes actions like ensuring that we can store more water in our groundwater basins when we have these heavy winter floods for times of drought to be able to use. That's been a strategy that's been underutilized in the past. And given this swinging pendulum and extreme water events, we know we need to capture more of our winter flows and put them into groundwater basins and even reservoirs for use during droughts. On the wildfire side, it's actions like investing much more funding in defensible fuel breaks around communities, where we reduce the density of vegetation, forest around communities that allow firefighters to come in and make a stand protecting communities. These are major investments that we're making. The governor announced 2 weeks ago, $15 billion of our state budget this year is invested in building climate resilience and taking climate action. And we also need federal support. And that's why we're so supportive of President Biden's call for real major infrastructure investments, but climate smart infrastructure investments. So we will weather and adapt to these changes we're experiencing in real time.
Thank you, Wade. Charles, same question to you. What are those policies, projects, and maybe technologies that you're putting in place, experimenting with to deal with some of your shocks and stresses?
Yeah, I'll take a little different angle than Wade, just for the sake of diversity of the conversation. So one of the things that we keep hearing about, this all of government approach, and what does that mean, and how do you do that? And so we've really been trying to grapple with that in Louisiana. We've got this great coastal master plan that really kind of lets us see the future a little bit. We're going to lose a lot of land no matter how successful we are, and we're going to be vulnerable to hurricanes no matter what good projects get put in place. So what we've been asking is, well, how can we get everybody else to kind of recognize that as being their problem too? It's not just about the people that build the levees. So this is about the health care system, and it's about the child and family services. It's about the roads. It's all these other facets of government. And so we've been under this executive order, the governor asked us to kind of go through and figure out how to first connect everybody to that problem, and make them understand that it's their problem too. And then we've been really trying to make it concrete instead of talking about, resilience out there. We've been trying to say, okay, look, here's what we got to first take. What are the steps you have to take? So we're working through vulnerability assessments. We're working through what it means to adapt. And in some cases, it's just about trying to think 10 and 15 years into the future instead of that 1 year or 2 year budget cycle. And I think that's really difficult for a lot of us in government, at least. And so that's been a really fruitful but challenging policy area that we've been kind of working through with our different agencies. And it sounds like inside baseball. Why, who cares what state government does among state government? But it's really all about making sure that we're able to serve the people. All these agencies have a mission. All these agencies exist for a reason, and that's to provide services to the people of Louisiana. And if we're not thinking about how those needs are going to change over the next few decades, then we're going to be completely flat-footed for as these chronic stressors get worse and as these acute stressors get more frequent and more severe. So that's another thing that we're working on.
My background is in local government, both city and county in South Florida. And now this is my first kind of jump into the private sector. So I still think of myself as a local government person. And I'm curious, since you both work at that state level, what should cities and counties be doing? How do you see that relationship? And how do you maybe create a stronger bonds so that you're serving the same people at the end of the day, right? So which one wants to take that one first?
I'm glad to take a crack, Charles. And, the rubber meets the road in local government, and I would say even state government. Next month, nations around the world will come together in Scotland and talk about what nations can do working together to combat climate change and really to set targets and achieve those targets. And that's important. But I'll be honest, the work's going to get done at the state level and the city and county level. And I think sometimes in these state capitals, we can feel that, it's all about state government. But in reality, much of what we need to do on resilience is done at the local level. In a place like California, the climate threats in greater Los Angeles with 10 million people are very different than the climate threats in Sacramento or our more rural communities. So a one-size-fits-all approach simply doesn't work on climate resilience. So from our perspective at the state, one thing we're focused on is what are the funding programs that we provide to locals? And then really support that local leadership, prioritizing those multiple threats that they face. So in the case of Los Angeles, for example, Mayor Garcetti there has set some really ambitious water goals, including recycling 100% of water by 2035, which is going to build their drought resilience, but also through a strategy to capture stormwater to reduce their flooding risk. And it's our responsibility, whether that's LA or anywhere else, to make sure that they have the policy, the regulatory tools, and the funding in place to build that local resilience.
Well, I'll just say a word too about kind of supporting the local government. I just agree with everything that Wade said and even that you said, Susie, in the introduction. And so really it comes down to, just what's the appropriate role for the state in that situation. And so what we've tried to do is we can model, we can put money into modeling, we can put money into kind of like designing these really massive kind of projects, kind of the big infrastructure type stuff, whether it's green or gray, that's necessary. But then the locals are really going to have to be kind of filling in those gaps and being the ones saying like, okay, that project's great and all, but this is what we need in our community. And there it's about, kind of helping them, line up with federal and state grant opportunities. We want to be help educate them, help them, provide capacity if they don't have the capacity to apply for some new grant program and fulfill all the reporting requirements while they're responding to issues in their community. Is that something that the state can do, or can the state, find partners to help build their capacity? Not to tell them what the right project is, but to help them understand, be able to get access to these things that they can't do. So I think capacity support is going to be really important, and just as usual, just as always, just listening to what their needs are and trusting that that viewpoint as much as we can.
Absolutely. And, Wade touched upon the federal government and hopefully the infrastructure bill and supporting everything that, on the president's agenda. Charles, I'm curious as to how you're maybe thinking about that infrastructure bill or other sources of federal funding, right? There in FEMA BRIC and other programs like that. I'm curious about, what are you doing in Louisiana getting ready potentially for this, hopefully, real, shock of funding to start addressing these things, right?
Well, we all have needs, and needs are high. And I think that yes, the federal this potential federal funding opportunity is something that we've got to be thinking about. Right now, Louisiana is really pushing hard for just emergency disaster relief. That I just can't stress that enough, that we are just, even though the storm hit a month ago, it's still very, very fresh in a lot of people's minds. So we're pushing for that. We're also pushing for, just making sure that we're ready in case whatever version of the infrastructure bill comes to pass. We can take advantage of it. So if it's capping methane wells, we want to be ready to go. If it's offshore wind, we want to be ready to go. All these different priorities. And I guess to zoom out a little bit, Louisiana has spent a lot of time and effort developing these plans. And so when these opportunities do arise, whether it's from a BP oil spill or from a federal funding, we know kind of what our priorities are and what projects are going to make the most difference for our needs. And so that's been really helpful. So we're able to kind of bring this plan to whatever funding situation comes available.
I'm watching the chat here as well, and we're getting some activity from the audience, and this one's like incredibly timely. So I do want to ask both of you, if in fact, what are states going to do if we actually don't get the Build Back Better bill and the Congress doesn't come through? Are you guys thinking about that and like a plan B, or I mean, that's a really good question. Wade, what do you think?
We're going to continue to lead at the state level. The fact is, we didn't stick our head in the sand for 4 years during the Trump administration when we were debating them on the existence of climate change. States were moving forward and making progress. And if you think about our energy system, our transportation systems, our water systems, those are not nationalized systems. Those are systems that exist at the state level. So we will continue to lead. But I'll say, given the scale and urgency of the climate crisis, federal leadership is essential, because while there are leading states like Louisiana, like I'd say California, we need national leadership and national resources to actually bring us all along. So, if Congress isn't able to step up on the infrastructure or the budget that the president's set forth, we're going to continue to make progress, just not as fast, not as far as if we were partnering with the federal government. Charles, I don't know if you have thoughts.
No, other than to say, I feel like, without the infrastructure bill, it's just it's business as usual. We're still trying, like Wade said, we're trying to lead. We're trying to do as much as we can with what we have. Would a shot in the arm go a long way? Would it help us meet the moment a little bit better? Of course it would, but there's plenty of work to do at the state level.
Absolutely. Both of you talked about extreme heat, right? As something that you're worried about. And I know that, that's coming up much more, and even some of the work I'm doing here in Florida. And I'm curious though about how do you think about equity when it comes to extreme heat, and maybe neighborhoods that can't afford air conditioning, or maybe neighborhoods that don't have that tree canopy naturally, right? Are there things that you're keeping in mind as you're developing some policies or working with the locals to deal with the question of equity?
Yeah, I've got thoughts, but Charles, sure, I'll go first.
No, Wade, please, yeah.
So I'm so glad you brought that up. And I'll mention, while these sectoral policies are really important, like our water strategy or our wildfire strategy, we're developing an overarching, actually updating our overall adaptation strategy for the state. And one of those key North Stars that's driving all of the work is prioritizing the most vulnerable communities, because we recognize that certain communities are much more vulnerable to these impacts based on their geography or wealth or lack thereof. So much of what we're focused on and really proud of is most of our investment that is actually going to those vulnerable communities. On extreme heat, there's plenty that we can do to actually reduce heats and protect people in poor communities. One obvious example is urban greening, building tree canopies in urban parts of our state that don't have them. National Geographic did a cover story this year where they identified or looked at 2 neighborhoods in greater Los Angeles, one with significant street trees and urban green space, and the other without. And they found a differential in temperature of 15 or 20 degrees on certain days. And guess which community was the poor community? So I'm so glad that Charles brought up the importance and the governor of attacking extreme heat. We're a little bit much like Louisiana, where we focus more on drought and wildfire, and we're really trying to catch up on extreme heat. But certainly there are investments we can make this year, next year on helping the communities most vulnerable to heat.
Thank you, Wade.
And just to say a few words on Louisiana's side, how we're thinking about it, we're in the midst of kind of building our climate policy from the ground up. So this is kind of a new territory for us. We've got this long history in coastal adaptation, but kind of how we go about addressing heat and how we go about reducing greenhouse gas emissions is kind of new to us. So as we're building that out, we've got an equity advisory group. We've got this real intentionality about thinking about who's bearing the burden from these changes, from these impacts, who's going to be asked to, who's going to get to benefit from all these policies that we want to put in place. And so I think that equity lens is super important. And we know that, in addition to all the things that Wade said, which we share, in Louisiana, there's also a huge energy burden on, low income communities. They're just paying more of their income to keep their houses cool. In Louisiana, I think, hopefully everybody's got an air conditioner. I mean, we've got to have it, but if all that air is going right through the walls and outside, it's exorbitantly expensive. And so we want to think about who's benefiting and designing policies so that, solar panels and battery packs are great, but how do we make sure that the people that need them the most can kind of get them too? So it's not just for those better off individuals. And so I think it's a huge focus of ours. We're trying to collect as much data as we can to kind of make really good decisions. We're also just trying to listen to the people who are asking for this attention.
Absolutely. As you were talking, again, I go back to my experience and having worked in South Florida for so many years, and the focus of our work was climate adaptation, to be honest. And we had to, it was sea level rise, it was flooding, it was the king tides. And Wade, you're right. When these things happen, they call City Hall, right? That's what residents do. I'm curious as to how both of your states are dealing with climate adaptation and mitigation. Are you putting enough, like the same emphasis on both? How are your policies and your plans and the way you communicate? How do you balance those two? I'm just kind of curious. Maybe Charles, I'll start with you this time.
Sure, thanks. And I would just say that we have, I think our particular disaster history has put us in an adaptation posture kind of similar to you probably, Susie, in Florida. So we have really been at the forefront of that since before 2005, but Hurricanes Katrina and Rita in 2005 really brought everything to the fore in Louisiana. And so that's when we started our coastal planning processes. This is where we started really planning for major adaptation investments. And it wasn't until last year, the beginning of the governor's second term, that we even started the process of mitigation conversation. So we are ahead of the curve on adaptation, I think, in a lot of degrees and a lot of senses, but we are very much playing catch up, but benefiting from leadership of states like California, kind of who've already kind of sorted out some of these policies and best practices as we kind of join the mitigation game.
Yeah, we're probably the opposite, which is we're learning from states like Louisiana on adaptation. We're really proud in California. We've set and pretty ambitious climate targets 15 years ago. And, one talking point that we have that we're really proud of is we've been able, in 2007, we set a goal to reduce carbon emissions to 1990 levels by 2020. And we actually met that target 4 years early. So we talk about our economy growing at a really healthy pace while our pollution being reduced. So I think California's been even ahead of the curve on climate mitigation or reducing carbon pollution. But we treated for so long climate adaptation in California as sort of a wonky future planning exercise. It was always that back burner issue that didn't attract the attention of the policymakers, didn't get foundation funding to advance, because it was always seen as in the future. And we have science just a decade ago that suggested that what we're experiencing now, we wouldn't experience until the beginning of next century. And so accelerating climate change means that now we have to deal with these adaptation issues as a matter of life and death. Our governor, Gavin Newsom, talks about the smash mouth reality of climate change in California. So now what we need to do, and what frankly everyone needs to do, is ensure that we can't do, it's not an either or, it's not separate compartments, it's both together. And prioritizing actions that both reduce carbon pollution and build our resilience. one example I give is distributed generation. So I have friends in the Bay Area that have solar on the rooftop. They have a Tesla battery on the side of their house. And when there are these public safety power shutoffs as a result of wildfire and electricity is interrupted, that home is doing just fine, powering their lives. And when there's not an emergency, they're obviously building or providing renewable energy to the grid. So more and more, we have to do both together.
You feel, or I'm sorry, Charles, go ahead.
Oh, no, I just say the one example that's really quintessentially Louisiana, I think, that does the exact same thing that Wade's talking about is the blue carbon work. And so we know that, coastal ecosystems can sequester all this carbon dioxide. We need to build coastal ecosystems to provide a buffer between our communities in the Gulf of Mexico that's getting higher all the time. And so that's where we see this same synergy too. We've got to mitigate and we've got to adapt at the same time. So I just couldn't agree more with Wade. It's a great point.
I was just going to ask Wade if you're sensing like a greater sense of urgency over time amongst decision makers and the communities. Do you feel that happening?
100%. I mean, I'm 20 floors up in our building in Sacramento. For most of the summer, you could hardly see the buildings behind me because of smoke. And imagine what that does to my 7-year-old's lungs. And for weeks and weeks, we're experiencing that in California. So I think there has been, it's hard to underestimate the sea change where climate action used to be a, nice to have for a lot of residents. Now it's a have to have because it's impacting their health and their lives right now.
And so the audience is asking a lot of questions here. So I'm gonna pick one that there's a real hard one. I'll wait till the end, but let me try this one about the grid and how can the grid adapt to increased disruptions due to extreme weather? Any thoughts on that?
Well, Wade probably has more experience, but I would say that in one of the early drafts of our climate plan, we have a first draft out, first draft ever out to the public. It just closed on Friday, but it came out right before Hurricane Ida hit, and that just really exposed just how vulnerable our grid really is to these kinds of intense hurricanes. And the microgrids looked a lot less crazy after Hurricane Ida than they did the week before. When this is not something that's really a part of the conversation a lot in Louisiana, but it's really that event really exposed the system really did fail in a major way. And so I think some of these ideas that might have been nice to have or back burner or just kinds of not priorities are all of a sudden just take on a lot more salience since then. But
couldn't agree more. And if you think about our infrastructure, whether it's water infrastructure or energy infrastructure in our country, it is generally speaking centralized, fairly rigid and static. And that worked well for decades, particularly in terms of building it and reducing the cost and providing cheap energy, cheap water. But in climate change, that's a real liability. So we need to actually make our energy system, our grid, but I'll say our water systems too, more decentralized, more dynamic, and more flexible. And I think Charles would agree that costs money, and that's a real paradigm shift. And again, for so long, it was a nice to have, or gold plating if you were a wealthy enough community to have some infrastructure investment to make. But now it's a have to have if we're really talking about protecting coastal communities from hurricane or California communities from wildfire. We have to make these investments.
That's great point. Thank you. Let me go to you mentioned money. There's a money question here. This one's interesting. If a carbon tax is what's needed to put the Build Back Better across the line, would states support higher fuel taxes to tackle the cost of the Build Back Better bill? Taxing fossil fuels should also help, but it could be a little more controversial in some states like Louisiana and Texas. So who wants to take that one?
Well, I'll jump in and add that it's also controversial in a state like California. We have major affordability issues in our state and our country. I've been paying over $4.50 at the tank at the gas station. I'll let you know I have a plug-in hybrid, but nonetheless. And so I think we have to be really careful about how this transition impacts the cost of living across our communities. And I think if you look at France, for example, and the so-called yellow jackets movement, what you realize is there is a limit that I think residents or Californians, Americans will have in terms of how much this transition costs. So I worry about the notion of focusing on increasing the cost of fossil fuels right now at a time when so many people still depend on them. I don't want to completely dismiss the notion of a carbon tax or fuel taxes, but that would be my point of caution.
And in Louisiana, I mean, and that's not just here. I don't know what tax is popular, amongst anybody, and so it is problematic. But it's also this really great, tool to kind of start pricing things that have been, gone too long, have not had a price put on them. So we are actually talking about it. So we've had a couple meetings on it, public meetings, just kind of really batting this around. We have a lot of industry in our state. We're 20% of the nation's refining capacity. We're just manufacturing a lot of chemicals. It's a really big part of our economy, and yet industry leaders and others in government are openly just kind of putting that idea on the table. And I think in some senses that's a good thing. Just kind of recognizing that as a policy mechanism that should be under consideration. The legislature will have a say in this, of course, and we're a divided government right now, and so you can have lots of different conversations, but certain ones matter more than others. And so I think we're kind of exploring that, but I couldn't agree more that, it's not just about the tax, but it's about who's going to have to bear the burden of it. So if it's all passed on to the consumer, if it's all going back to the gas pump or in that homeowner's energy bill, that's not going to be acceptable to anybody, I don't think. So I think there's got to be a way to, if it ever comes to pass, kind of keep that price burden off of, especially low-income neighborhoods and residents, try to reinvest somehow into all these adaptation needs that we do have. We can't just create the money just to reduce folks' taxes. So hopefully we could do a little bit of everything, but it's all in the details, like everything else.
So I think we have time for one more question because our audience is very engaged. So what do you see as the biggest challenge for local and statewide governments in relation to fostering partnerships with private businesses to support building long-term climate adaptation and resilience?
I have a thought, Wade, I don't know if you mind, but I think a real challenge that we have in Louisiana, like I've been saying, we've been really out front about what our risk is since Hurricane Katrina. We put out maps every 5 years showing like where we think land's going to disappear and what we think your 100-year storm surge is going to look like. And on the one hand, we're being really transparent and we're saying like this is what the risk is, and we're picking projects to do what we can to reduce that risk. On the other hand, we're out there telling private industry and everybody else that we have risk across our state. And so then we've got local governments in there who are trying to bond out projects, whether it's just a normal bridge or whether it's a flood protection levee. There's a real interaction there that I really worry about. And so then to add on top of that, we've got other efforts that are right-minded, right, to be transparent about what flood risk is. So risk rating 2.0 coming out of the National Flood Insurance Program, we can't have people not knowing what their flood risk is, but at the same time, people can't be paying 3 times their mortgage for flood insurance every year, especially if they've kind of been living in the same house under the same conditions. So I really think the locals are really, I worry a lot about the kind of the financial markets and some of these implications for locals. So anyway, that's just a thought that I had.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think, look, if you're a business, whether you're a small business or a large business, your focus is on serving the customer, creating a product, making a profit. You're not going to be experts in climate resilience. And I think we need to provide a better roadmap to all manner of businesses in the private sector around what actions are helpful to build resilience. Whether it's in facilities or in operations. I think in California, we've done a good job over time, for example, helping businesses, companies understand the importance of energy efficiency and renewable energy. And so I think if you're a big company or a medium-sized company, you kind of know what it means to reduce your carbon footprint, which of course is on the mitigation side. I think a lot of those companies would be hard pressed to know what it means to build your climate resilience or the resilience of your business or your employees to climate change. So I think we need to really catch up and create roadmaps, programs, incentives for companies to take those resilience actions like they've been taking those climate mitigation actions.
Well, it seems like we're getting close to the end of our session, but I always like to leave a little room at the end for the panelists to think about what's that final message that you want to leave the audience? What are the key messages that you want to resonate? And in this case, you know, we've been talking about a lot of difficult issues, right? And you both have incredibly important jobs in big states, right? So, you know, what is that message perhaps of hope or inspiration that you can leave the audience as, you know, we're all in this business of tackling, climate shocks and stresses and building resilience. What are the last maybe two minutes each of you of that last message you want to leave the audience? Wade?
Well, thanks for the opportunity to be here. I never imagined that we would be eyeballs deep in the climate crisis like we are. And the challenges are daunting, and it is easy to be discouraged, but I actually maintain hope, and I'm energized because we're taking action. We, more than ever before, and more importantly, the people that we serve understand the stakes. Many of us, you know, the audience here today, maybe we've been working on climate change for a couple of decades, and it used to be somewhat of a boutique policy issue, or one that, you know, your regular friend or parent wouldn't understand. Now, I think more and more people understand what's at stake in their own lives. So we're finding that there's more urgency and accountability to actually take actions, and actions that move us further and faster to reducing pollution, stabilizing our climate, and protecting our communities and natural places. So, you know, I think it's a terribly important time to be doing this work, and I think we have no doubt challenges like we've never experienced, but the wind at our backs in terms of taking the actions to meet, as Charles said, the moment. So really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you. And Charles, you're doing great work in Louisiana.
Thanks, Wade. It's really an honor to be here amongst people and states like yours in this issue. I think my like kind of final word and little moment of hope is that I think as funny as it sounds, if Louisiana can start having these conversations, then I think you can too. Is kind of the message I want to put out there. A year ago, just over a year ago, we went out of our way not to say the word climate change. And in just that 1 year, you know, the governor is at the Climate Leadership Conference putting in a video. I'm on this panel. We're in the U.S. Climate Alliance, the Climate Registry. We're going to COP. We're in Race to Zero. So much that is a lot of change in just a short amount of time, and that's really inspiring. But beyond all that unilateral action that we've been able to take, this Climate Initiatives Task Force that we have has major industry representatives and environmental justice representatives at the same table at the same time. And so, and everybody in between, kind of having this conversation and kind of working through it. And so for 10 months, we've been talking about this problem from different viewpoints, as different as they can be, and everybody's still at the table. And I'm just so heartened by that and by the leadership that everybody's shown in this issue. And so you can feel it in every meeting that everybody there, no matter where they're coming from, is out on a limb. And that's really, it seems really fragile, but also really like something we can build on from there too. So I just feel like, I just hope that Louisiana, you know, like I said, we're playing catch up in the mitigation space, but we're trying to learn from everybody that's come before us and try to like really get everybody's voice included from the ground up. And we're really in it now. And I think that's exciting because from the outside, I think it seems impossible for a state like ours, but it's not. So.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. Thanks to both of you. I know that when I was at local government, we had a network of CROs at that local level, and I hope you guys have that too. There's so much you can share and learn from each other, and it's really been a pleasure to spend some time getting to know what's happening in your states. Thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing everything that you're doing. Best of luck to both of you, and I want to ask the audience to thank the panelists, and now I'm going to turn it back to our host, Amy Holm. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everybody.